Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silvermont, and in this video we're going to take a look at and discuss one subject in an attempt to answer one specific question. Does a video game being open world automatically make it better? My answer to that would be no, but it seems that in recent years, open world has become a key selling point for many games, used as an objective mark of quality. First things first, what is an open world game? It can be defined in several ways, but for the sake of this video we will define it as a game where a large portion of the game world is open to you upon starting the game. You can explore the majority of the game space and tackle it in any order you so choose. Skyrim, Just Cause, Grand Theft Auto, and so on. In recent years, more and more games have been making the transition into open world, as publishers seem to think that is the only thing that people who play video games want. The market is shifting in that direction, you might say. What caused this? Whilst we probably can't pin it down to one exact cause, if we had to, I would point towards Skyrim. This is a game that has sold over 30 million copies and is absolutely everywhere. It's one of the biggest games there is. It gets ported onto every platform imaginable, and more or less everyone knows about it. Skyrim came out in 2011, and I remember specifically one article asking Japanese game developers what their favourite game was that year, and the majority of them listed Skyrim. Why I bring this up will become evident soon. But what other game came out at the end of 2011 was open world and absolutely massive in terms of appeal and sales? Minecraft, of course. Now, Minecraft was around before that time, but the official release was November 2011, same as Skyrim. The combination of these two games, in my eyes, caused a market shift towards open world games. Publishers looked at Skyrim and Minecraft and saw the potential there, and started moving their existing franchises into an open world direction. Well, that's fine, but can we really say that open world is objectively better than a linear game? If you take an existing game franchise that is linear and make it open world, is that automatically going to improve it? I do not think so. The line between objectivity and subjectivity is of course a very fine and confusing one at times, but there are cases one can make. Let's take frame rate and resolution for example. Purely from an objective perspective, the higher the resolution and frame rate, the better. That doesn't suggest there is a direct link between a game's quality and its resolution, obviously, but 1080p is better than 720p. 4K is better than 1080p. Now, I'm sure there is someone out there who prefers 720p, or would say, well, 720p is better because I can get a higher frame rate, but if you ignore factors like that, 1080p is better than 720p in every way. Because there are no realistic advantages to 720 over 1080, it is a straight upgrade. Right now we have 4K being marketed to use as this super awesome thing. It's 50 times bigger than full high definition. So why are open worlds being treated in the same way as HDR and 4K? Open world games are not, in my opinion, better than linear games. They are just different. In the same way that a racing game is not automatically better than a fighting game, or an RPG is automatically better than an action game. They are just different. You might prefer one to the other, but that comes down to your subjective taste. EA gave this statement a few months back, which I find very interesting. Our visceral studio has been developing an action-adventure title set in the Star Wars universe. In its current form, it was shaping up to be a story-based, linear adventure game. Throughout the development process, we have been testing the game concept with players, listening to the feedback about what and how they want to play, and closely tracking fundamental shifts in the marketplace. It has become clear that to deliver an experience that players will want to come back to and enjoy for a long time to come, we needed to pivot the design. We will maintain the stunning visuals, authenticity in the Star Wars universe, and focus on bringing a Star Wars story to life. Importantly, we are shifting the game to be a broader experience that allows for more variety and player agency, blah blah blah. Right now, this is mere speculation, but you know how I took that statement? The market trends right now are all about open world action games, so we're turning our linear Star Wars game into one of those. It was troubling to me, and I don't think it's a coincidence. When the game is re-revealed later on, I suppose we'll see, but I have a strong suspicion that's the case. It's going to be re-revealed in a few months or years or whenever, and it's going to be an open world, maybe even pseudo-online game, probably with loot boxes too. Earlier I mentioned how many Japanese developers stated Skyrim was their favourite game of 2011. And is it a coincidence that in the years following, we've had loads of games suddenly making the transition to open world, and quite often with terrible results? Metal Gear Solid 5, Final Fantasy 15, Dynasty Warriors 9, Breath of the Wild, and Xenoblade Chronicles I'm going to include as well, as it's technically part of the Xeno series. At time of writing, Dynasty Warriors 9 isn't out, and I haven't played Xenoblade Chronicles, but if we look at Metal Gear, Final Fantasy and Zelda, these are some of the biggest franchises in all Japan, and all three made the transition to open world, and these are three that we will focus on, because I think they highlight, in many ways, the best and worst parts of open world games. Let's start with Metal Gear Solid 5, a game which, in my opinion, represents some of the worst of open world games, and I believe the entire experience, the entire game, suffers for it. Briefly before I start off though, if you've played Metal Gear Solid 5, what are the most memorable parts of it to you? For me, it's the opening section, which is a linear section through the hospital. But that out of the way, simply put, why is Metal Gear Solid 5 open world? What is the point? Consider the difference between Ground Zeroes and Phantom Pain. The prospect of being able to approach an enemy base from any avenue you choose is amazing. Sure, I'm not gonna argue that. But then you have to remember that these bases are what, 10% of the game map? There's Afghanistan and Africa, and sure, there are cool bases in these maps, but 90% of them is just endless trash. These areas serve absolutely no purpose other than being empty space between the areas you actually want to be in and have stuff to do in. Is it fun to traverse these areas? Are there interesting side activities to take part in? Is there something interesting to see or look at? Nope, it is utterly pointless and harms the game's scope and story if you ask me. Imagine if they cut out all that empty, pointless space and dedicated that time, all those resources, to making more enemy bases. I reckon Metal Gear Solid 5 would have been much better if they had taken the Ground Zeroes approach. Just give us lots of Ground Zeroes. Or better yet, look at Metal Gear Solid 1, 2 and 3. You could argue these are hybrid open worlds in some ways, but all three of them worked so much better than what 5 attempted. I can't comment on 4 because I've never played it myself, only watched the cutscenes on YouTube. But if you cut out all the empty space between the bases and just kept the bases, and several hundred yards or feet of their outlying terrain, would anything fun or interesting be removed from the game? Not really, because there is nothing interesting to see or do. It's just empty desert or empty savanna plains or whatever. How about Final Fantasy 15? This one I would say is a mixed experience. Final Fantasy games have been semi-open world in the past, but this one made the big leap. And in some ways, yes, it does work. In other ways, you can tell that the developers had no idea what to do from the story perspective, especially considering the last third of the game just takes you away from the open world and dumps you into a linear section, which I frankly preferred. But let's go into more detail. What works about the open world in 15? The game attempts to portray the experience of being on a road trip with your friends, and to some extent, yes, it manages that very well. There are interesting places to visit, beautiful vistas, and you will be camping and driving around a lot. To some extent, the open world makes sense, and it can be fun to explore. But then, in many other ways, it falls apart. The story in particular suffers from the open world, as your characters meander about pointlessly. If you are summarising the story of Final Fantasy 15, all of the important stuff happens in the last third of the game, where you leave the open world and are set upon a linear path. Sardonically, this linear path is quite literally a railroad. And the open world segments also suffer from inane side quests that are so breathtakingly boring. You know what I always wanted to do in a Final Fantasy game? Drive back and forth between a farm and a town picking up vegetables. Yes, that is literally a chain of side quests, not just one, a whole chain, where he says, go and get my tomatoes. Then you go and get his carrots, and you just go back and forth, delivering vegetables and crops. That is how you don't do side quests. And what about Breath of the Wild? Here is an example, I would argue, of an open world game that actually works. But at the same time, the Zelda aspects of the game kind of suffer for it, that is to say the dungeons. Zelda has long been semi-open world, just like the other two, and the fact that the dungeons in Breath of the Wild suffer so is inexplicable to me. I see no direct link between the open world and dungeons. No direct link, oh my god, no pun intended, but there is no reason you couldn't have old school style dungeons separate from the open world, really. Of course, the game being so open does mean that you have to do things in a non-linear fashion, so maybe that is why the dungeons suffer. You can't have Dungeon X, which requires item Y, being done before you have item Y. But ignoring the lackluster dungeons, the open world in Breath of the Wild hits on what an open world should offer. And what is that? Well, in a nutshell, the sense of adventure. Back when I played Breath of the Wild, I would often find myself looking at something far in the distance and wondering to myself, what is that? What is that glowing light high in the mountains? What is that weird thing wrapped around that mountain? Apparently I'm just obsessed with mountains, but hey, it's fine. I would spend in-game days traversing to that location. Exploring and traversing the world was a fun experience. Apart from when it rained, that was absolutely garbage, but it was thanks to the tools available to the player. We didn't run into invisible walls everywhere, and the world was full of interesting looking landmarks and areas. You could go to the final dungeon, pretty much right off the bat, and they didn't have invisible walls. You could climb up all these places and try and find clever ways to get in. And that's really fun in games. It's lovely when you don't have invisible walls and you can actually explore this 3D space to your heart's content. I have quite a few issues with Breath of the Wild, but I think the open world is one of the best in, well, many games really. Just like Just Cause, it is fun to traverse the world, and that is extremely important. But then, the side quests, well, they're terrible when they fall into the familiar trap of irrelevance. How many side quests from Breath of the Wild are you going to remember a few years from now? Probably not many. But okay, just for contrast, how about a game with good open world side quests? I would say Witcher 3 is a great example of that. The world itself in Witcher 3 isn't super exciting, considering a lot of it is just swamps and forests, but it is full of things to do, and the side quests are great and memorable. They are a highlight of the experience for me, even if you can boil down many of them to walk to an area and look around using magical Witcher senses. The writing is what holds it up. Then we have Dynasty Warriors 9, a title I doubt many people care about, but as somebody who has been playing Dynasty Warriors for almost 20 years, I can't believe they have made such a stupid move. How can you look at the design of Dynasty Warriors and think open world is a good match? Sure, the game isn't out at the time I'm writing this, but there are so many warning signs. A big empty mass of boring fields and forests. Maybe there's an NPC who wants me to rescue her cat. That's exactly why I played Dynasty Warriors, to rescue cats. It also makes no sense with the story of the game. How is the battle at Hulao Gate going to work if I just ignore it and go to the other side of China? And already the game appears to be suffering from this focus on open world. Many of the characters have been reduced to clones of each other. It's almost like the developers didn't look at Dynasty Warriors 6, which tried to change things up and made half the characters clones in the process. They should have looked at that and gone, hey, that was stupid, let's not do that again. Now, don't get me wrong, I am all for taking risks and trying something new, but you have to remain logical in that process. If you are a restaurant that specializes in pizza. Sure, take new risks by trying new pizzas. Don't take new risks by throwing dough balls at your customers as they come in the door and going, well, this is our new business strategy. Nobody likes clones in a game with multiple characters, and these characters are often one of the primary reasons people buy these games. That should be the focus, not open world, because that has no relevance on the actual game that people are enjoying. We buy Dynasty Warriors because we want to take our favourite characters, go through an absurd story, and obliterate 5,000 peons in a single second. Why on earth would you think we want to aimlessly wander around an empty expanse for hours? And how does it seem like a good idea to make it so all those amazing, wacky and fun movesets are gone, reducing characters to clones of each other who just have different appearance but the same moves? This is exactly my point with open world games. A lot of developers seem to think they can sell a game purely based on the fact that it is open world, as if that is a huge selling point. It should not be. Especially when not many developers can get an open world game right in the first place. Open world works in Just Cause, because I can grapple through the air, throw motorbikes into buildings, and watch everything collapse and explode. It fits with the theme of the story. The whole game is built around the open world, like in Grand Theft Auto. You can't take Dynasty Warriors and just cram it into an open world formula. It's not gonna work any more than it worked for Metal Gear Solid 5. Open world does not work when I'm waddling around wondering how to fast travel because I'm stuck in the middle of a boring, featureless desert. How so many game designers can't wrap their heads around this incredibly simple concept is a mystery to me. At the end of the day, you need to ask yourself one question. Does the open world make the game fun? No? Then get it the hell out of here. Does the open world serve the story? No? Then why is it here? But now that I've gotten that out of my system, what do you think? Are you excited at the prospect of a game franchise you enjoy going open world? What are your favourite or most hated open world games? And one final note, the next Elder Scrolls game is gonna have a hell of a reputation to live up to. Video games have come a long way since 2011, when it comes to open world action and RPGs. Me, I look forward to seeing what they manage.